Again, my name is Melissa Passarelli. I am a former Learn the Signs Act Early Ambassador for New York State, but at present I am the Associate Director of Implementation and System Building at the Help Me Grow National Center. Help Me Grow, for those who are unfamiliar, is the country's only evidence-based model for an early childhood system. But today I'm here to talk about family engaged developmental monitoring. The objective for this talk is to identify what family engaged developmental monitoring is and how it fits into a framework for children's healthy development and family well-being. A little bit of background before I talk about family engaged developmental monitoring. So the CDC's Learn the Signs Act Early campaign a few years ago, when COVID hit, they had worked with the Learn the Signs Act Early ambassadors across the country to lead state level teams to kind of look at how the early identification continuum was impacted by COVID. And based on those needs assessment, they identified a need to explore and enhance utilization of what they termed a coordinated integrated data system for early identification. Basically, a data system that could look at the entire spectrum of early identification from developmental monitoring all the way through receipt of services. And so they worked with Help Me Grow National Center in partnership with the Association of University Centers on Disabilities to explore what we would call a CIDSI, a Coordinated Integrated Data Systems for Early Identification, and eventually put forth a toolkit for how other states could implement that. But in our extensive landscape scanning and key stakeholder interviews with those both inside and outside of the country, not only did we not find an example of exactly what the CDC was looking for, but instead what we found was that those across the field did not all agree on what is and what it looks like. And so we went back to the CDC and said, hey, I'm sorry we can't deliver on what you asked for because it doesn't exist. Instead, we found that there's this big issue in that if we, as a field, again, like are not on the same page about what developmental monitoring is, what it looks like, we won't be able to measure it. And therefore, this measurement that you want as part of a more comprehensive data system won't be possible. So instead, we switched gears and we said, what if we really clarified and codified what developmental monitoring is and looks like so that we could standardize practice so that we could measure that practice and then eventually feed that data into a comprehensive system. So that is how we ended up with the roadmap for advancing family engaged developmental monitoring. So this roadmap introduces and describes what we term family engaged developmental monitoring, or FEDM for short, as a key component of an overall framework for children's healthy development and family well-being. The roadmap was evidence informed through literature review, additional landscape scans and key stakeholder interviews, as well as a work group comprised of early childhood system leaders across the Help Me Grow National Affiliate Network and a national advisory committee with all types of great experts across the early childhood field. It includes key definitions and concepts, as well as self-assessments, both at the program provider level as well as the system level, to assess to the extent you are engaging in family engaged development monitoring and opportunities to do more around that. So before I go into this talk, I want to clarify some terminology. We have a whole list of different definitions in the roadmap, but in particular, when I say provider for the purposes of the roadmap and this talk, I'm referring to all those that interact with young children and their families. So that includes clinical providers from the medical sector, but it also includes early childhood educators, social service providers, community-based organizations, faith-based, any sector that serves families with young children, we would consider a provider. Additionally, family refers to the people with whom the child has a close personal relationship and who are responsible for the well-being and development of the child. So that, of course, can include parents, but also grandparents, siblings, anyone else that is important to the raising of the child. Early identification means the timely detection of concern for developmental delay or disability. And when we talk about a holistic approach, we're talking about considering multiple factors across the social ecology that may contribute to overall health and well-being. We also use the term social drivers of health. I know before this, was more familiar with the term social determinants, but we want to make sure that it's not determining. They certainly drive health, so we use that term as well. So just, to back up, when The way that the field has understood early identification has really evolved over the past few decades. It used to be that this was to detect developmental delays and concerns and treat them. And it's not that that's not the purpose anymore, but in order to back up and say, like, well, there's also children who are at risk for developmental delay. And if we are only rooted on finding children who have like the presence of developmental delay, we are missing all those children at risk. And we're also missing the opportunity to promote overall well-being. So alongside that, originally, when we were presented with this project, we were presented with the steps to early identification, where step 1 was developmental monitoring, step 2 was developmental screening, step 3 was referral, and step 4 was connection to services. And we said, like that, it's not really steps. A lot of these are kind of happening concurrently. So in putting together this roadmap, it was really putting together a broader conceptualization of the process and taking an asset-based approach, where the overall goal of this entire process would be to promote positive outcomes. And in doing so, we are also going to identify children with delays and refer them to services that can support them. But that is not the goal of the system. The goal is to promote positive outcomes. Also ensuring that we are recognizing families as leaders and experts in their child's development. So again, backing up, what is this overall framework for children's healthy development and family well-being? It's just a reconceptualization of all the things that we already know about. So it describes the process needed to support child and family well-being, inclusive of early identification, and so inclusive of ongoing monitoring of young children who are not in need of early intervention, but have identified risk factors for developmental delay. It also identifies developmental promotion, such as, education and interaction with families to ensure that they know what to expect as their child develops and how to support that as a discrete component. Because what we found in our stakeholder interviews and things like that is that developmental promotion was being conflated with developmental monitoring. And so again, rather than having steps, we recognize that there are universal strategies that should be happening with all children throughout their early childhood development. So including developmental promotion, ongoing, should always be happening. Family engaged developmental monitoring, which I'll get into, can be happening all the time. And then screening should be happening with all children at the recommended ages. The AAP recommends 9 months, 18 months, and either 24 or 30 months. In addition to that, there's targeted strategies. So not every family will need a referral, but those that do, we want to refer them and ensure that they receive those services, but ensuring that we are thinking about referrals as all the things that broadly impact child development and not exclusively around, around IDEA Part B and C, for example. Okay, so what is family engaged developmental monitoring? The definition that we put forth in this roadmap is that FEDM is an intentional partnership of families and providers combining their knowledge of developmental milestones and identify opportunities for support and education. There are 3 essential attributes that we identified, that families are seen as the experts, that we are looking at a holistic picture of child's development, and that development is discussed longitudinally. So the question that I always get when talking about this is, okay, so is FEDM different than developmental monitoring or developmental surveillance? So no. The idea is developmental surveillance is, as you know, a term long used by the medical community to describe eliciting and attending to families' opinions and concerns about their child's development as part of their ongoing interactions during service delivery. The field at large also uses the term developmental monitoring, which is a little bit more of a light touch. They are kind of distinct. Developmental monitoring is more common in non-clinical early childhood settings, and it refers generally to observation and tracking of developmental milestones as the child grows. So when we were writing this roadmap, we were trying to consolidate across the early childhood field what is best practice regardless of provider, and also what terminology resonates with families, and also how can we ensure that we are centering families in the process. So that's where the term family engaged came in front of developmental monitoring. Also, we know that developmental surveillance, that term surveillance, doesn't really resonate well with families. It often is off-putting. Developmental monitoring is something that feels a little bit more familiar to them. So we said, well, what if we took the general idea of developmental surveillance from the medical community and embraced that across the early childhood field, but again, used this updated terminology so that we were centering families in the name itself, as well as using language that's more familiar to them. So again, family engaged developmental monitoring utilizes concepts from developmental surveillance and more familiar and parent appropriate terminology of monitoring, while intentionally including the phrase family engaged to center families as key partners in the process. In other words, now when we talk about like developmental violence surveillance, we just use this term instead, and we use it to apply across all sectors in the early childhood field. So what does this look like? So because it is family engaged, it means that there are strategies for both families and providers to engage in. So of the three attributes that I mentioned, where families are regarded as the expert in their child's development, some strategies on the family side include families sharing observations and opinions about their skills, the child's skills and behaviors, voicing what healthy development means to them. Providers would actively elicit family goals, questions, and concerns, ask the family's opinion of their child's development, and identify parent priorities. For the next attribute, taking a holistic approach, families would learn about factors that support or hinder development and gather perspective from multiple adults or programs with that interact with their children. And providers would, again, talk to the family about their family's strengths as well as other risk factors, and asking about other programs and providers that they engage with, and any insights they may have. And then finally, development is discussed over time. Families would note and reflect on their child's development over time. They would share how long any risk factors or concerns have been present and revisit questions over time. And providers would ask families how their child's development or their own concerns have changed over time and re-engage with the family to revisit those questions and concerns. We see family engaged developmental monitoring as an approach to advancing equity, because when we ensure that families are centered in the process and are really driving the process, we are shifting the power dynamic back into the hands of families rather than that more traditional relationship where it would kind of be like provider has the expertise. Here it's noting both pieces of the equation have equally important expertise to share. We also know that for some parts of the population, developmental screening and evaluation may not be the best method of early identification for all families due to historical, institutionalized, and structural racism. And so ensuring that we have other ways to identify concerns or look at other risk factors is really key. We also know that FEDM is more accessible than other components of the framework like screening, lending itself to broader utilization and acting as a strategy for targeted universalism in which we can ensure, if we can ensure this is happening across the early childhood field in different places, we are ensuring that there are more opportunities to both promote positive outcomes and identify concerns when we have them. Okay, so that was really fast. I put a QR code here if you wanted to read the roadmap or any of the additional resources that we have alongside of it. I didn't have a chance to review, but the roadmap includes self-assessments that you can take. So if you're a provider in a program or if you're working at a more system level, there's 2 different assessments where you can look at to what extent are you already engaging in this? Because I'm sure you're engaging in so many of these activities that we would consider FEDM. There may also be some things that you're not engaging in, and there's an opportunity to say, is there a way to incorporate this into our practice? And if so, what would that look like? There's other resources in the toolkit, including talking points, PowerPoint presentations, things like that. We also strongly encourage leveraging existing resources such as the CDC Act Early Materials and their app, other developmental apps that you may be familiar with to support family engaged developmental monitoring activities.